So after this, we have to, because it's mostly me and Mark, we had to see get this application
Oh, yeah.
together.
Yeah,
So that's exciting though. If we can get, if the town can get some, at least a chunk of that,
for sure.
get some of this stuff done,
Yeah.
actually implemented.
It's the sidewalk, right?
Well, I guess the maximum award for the grant is upwards of like 600,000.
Okay.
So
Oh,
it's like, it could be the sidewalk, some of the pen signals,
oh, awesome.
maybe even ADA ramps. And I gotta see what Mark comes up with for
Yeah.
better cost estimates for some of that stuff.
Oh, that's cool. That's great.
Yeah. So we'll see. It's good though, because we already have a report. So you could probably just reuse some of the text for the
For
application.
sure. Yeah.
Makes it easier.
Yeah. If you need like the graphics manipulated, but just a little bit, let
Yeah.
me know. 'Cause
Okay. The only thing I can think I need is just like grab some of the like concepts and just turn off some of the callouts that
Yeah,
aren't relevant
yeah.
or something.
that's easy.
We'll see. I think it's due in about 2 weeks, so we got time. Wednesday. It's due on the 16th, which
Is it a big?
is actually a Friday.
Is it a big proposal, like grant proposal?
Not really.
Okay.
No. No.
That's good.
It's got like 5 sections that can have like written text,
Yeah, like they ask you questions.
letters of support and stuff from the town. Yeah, there's questions. 5 different kind of sections.
Okay.
Why is this important? I should have printed out a copy of the application, but it doesn't look too long. All
Good.
things considered.
So we're streaming whenever you're ready.
Okay. Should we dim the lights so that I guess you can see pretty good. Yeah, that worked. All right. Well, hello everybody. Happy to be here. My name is Neil Olinsky. With me tonight is Emily Foster. We're with Milo and McBrum. I've seen a lot of familiar faces. We've been involved with this project for a better part of a year and a half. But we're pretty much at the end of the report, basically at the point where we're going to present the findings, present the recommendations, and go from there, really. Just want to hit the next slide. Again, the purpose of this meeting, we're here to present the report findings, recommendations for improving pedestrian safety along Main Street South, and to show you folks some visual concept design plans to sort of see what some of these pedestrian safety improvements along Main Street South would look like. And I'm giving a presentation, but feel free to interrupt if you have any pressing questions along the way. I think it's just easier to take questions as I go along. Either way is fine. All right, next slide. So just a bit of a timeline, just sort of background. We started in April of 2019 with the project. We were authorized at that time. We held a kickoff meeting just to get things started with the Planning Commission of May of 2019. The month after that, we had a field walk, public field walk, an evening public input meeting. That was great. We got a lot of good input. In June of 2019, in the summer and fall of last year, we worked on draft concept plans and a draft of the report. Over the winter, unfortunately, Dolores, former planner, had some medical issues, and she subsequently retired in March, sadly passed in, I believe, May. Just before that, in February, we did meet with the Planning Commission and presented on some of the concepts at that time that we had. We got some feedback. We made some changes. COVID stalled things further, but here we are today presenting the final report. Next slide. So our report, it's been online. I'm sure some folks have seen it. Basically, this is the structure of the report. We have some background. We looked at the town's plan of conservation development, some of the past streetscape reports for Main Street South. We looked at existing conditions along Main Street South, getting input not only from the field walk but our own field reconnaissance. We looked at, I sort of narrowed it down into some of the pedestrian needs that we saw, came up with some conceptual design plans. Those are in the report, and we're going to go over those shortly. The report also has a section on some of the safety benefits that would be associated with some of the improvements. And some cost estimates in the report to sort of bring it back down to earth in terms of how much the improvements would cost construction-wise, and there's a discussion in the report about next steps. So in terms of existing conditions, like I mentioned, the field walk, we looked at traffic signal plans, we looked at crash data, we tried to take it all in and see what the needs were for needs and deficiencies in terms of pedestrian safety along Main Street South. I'm not gonna go through every single thing. I think the bulk of what I want to present is some of the recommendations, but I mean, we heard things like, some of the signals down by Southbury Green, there's really no walk signals at those intersections. There's push buttons, but it's confusing. There's no don't walk signals. There's some areas where sidewalks don't exist, such as the library. Some areas where sidewalks, at the time at least, were crumbling. There's portions of sidewalks, a few places where water drains over, so in the winter sometimes it freezes. Things of that nature. Some areas where vegetation overgrown. Some need for new crosswalks and things like that. All right, next slide. So in terms of crash data, crashes are always one of the key things to sort of get an idea of, crashes are the ultimate worst thing you could obviously have on a street. We like to look at those and try to see what perhaps could have been done infrastructure-wise to avoid this type of crashes that we saw. In the last 15 years, the crash data indicated that there were, I think, 5 pedestrian crashes, a couple bicyclist crashes. 2 of the pedestrian crashes occurred at the, I believe, Southbury Green signal. A couple crashes occurred at Floodbridge Road, one up at Peter Road, and actually two bicyclist crashes occurred up at the northeasterly end of the corridor. Next slide. So we'll get right into it. We're going to start at the southwest end of the corridor and sort of work our way towards the northeast. At the intersection of South Britton Road and Main Street South, there's actually a state DOT project that's in design to do some improvements there, traffic-related improvements, but also put in pedestrian signals at the intersection. This is in the works with the state. Last I checked, however, my understanding is it's stalled. I think funding is a concern. But nonetheless, I would suggest the town continue to work with DOT. There's every municipality in the state has a local traffic authority who is essentially the liaison between the municipality and the state. The town should, quite frankly, just bug the state about this and try to get it moving forward. What is shown here is largely the state's plan. One thing we did notice that could or should, we think, get added is a sidewalk to Maggie McFly's. That would be an additional thing to the state project. I think, yes, that would be on private property, so again, a consideration there. Also, when we go through these concepts, we've got the cost estimates at the lower right-hand corner, just to give a sense of how much the improvements would cost, construction-wise. And the costs, again, are for everything on each individual slide. It's the total of the costs for everything. Now, as we go through the different improvements, not everything necessarily, perhaps, is a priority. If the town were to do some of the improvements or stretch out implementing some of the improvements over time, obviously, there wouldn't be a one-time cost. Some of the key priority improvements that we'll get into are probably things that we want to do sooner than later. But again, those would be a fraction of the cost of all of the improvements on some of these, or on the concepts that we're showing. All right, next slide. So, Southbury Green intersection with Main Street South. We have a number of different things that we noticed. Again, this signal, traffic signal, does not have pedestrian walk signals. There's push buttons, which do what is called, it's basically you push the button It's not immediate, but it calls the green for the side street or the driveway. What they call side street green, but there's no indication of when to walk. There's no pedestrian signal out there. So that's one of the key recommendations we're suggesting, is that the town incorporate pedestrian walk and which are also have state-of-the-art, pedestrian walk countdown signal heads, so that it's clear. If you're standing on a corner, you can tell when it's time to walk. What's out there now is it calls the side street green, so a pedestrian is expected to cross with traffic still. So if a pedestrian presses the push button today, it will call the green for the driveway or the side street. It all it does is stop traffic on Main Street South. So a pedestrian out there walking still has to contend with traffic turning in and out of the driveways. What we're suggesting, in addition to putting in walk signals, is that the phasing of the intersection, how it operates, change so that when a pedestrian's push button gets pushed and the walk signal comes on, that it stops all traffic. What's called in traffic engineering world is an exclusive pedestrian phase. So that's a key suggestion, recommendation in the report. In addition to that, the corners, at each of the corners, currently have what is called pedestrian curb ramps. They do not have the current ADA compliant, what you see, what they're called, like little tactile strips. Those could get incorporated. The crosswalks themselves are paint, which is fine. As a sort of aesthetic kind of improvement, the town could put in sort of a stamped concrete sort of crosswalk, just a nicer looking type of setup. Not absolutely critical, as long as you have striped sort of zebra crossings, what they call, which is the regular striped crossings. Those are sufficient, which are out there now. In addition to that, on this slide, another thing that shows up in a lot of the different recommendations is the suggestion that the travel lanes, the vehicle lanes, be narrowed to, say, 11 feet, maybe 10 feet for turn lanes. 11 feet for a vehicle travel lane is actually the state's standard nowadays. The whole theory behind narrowing the lane, say, right now, the width varies, but there's some section where the travel lanes are, they're quite wide, maybe 12, 13, 14, 15 feet. The purpose of narrowing a lane to, say, 11 feet is it does actually, some of the statistics do show that it slows traffic a little bit. And that's really the ultimate goal. I mean, what we want to do is make drivers, part of putting in pedestrian improvements is not only putting in improvements that are dedicated for pedestrians, like pedestrian signals, but also improving safety overall by, relatively modest traffic calming measures, and narrowing lanes is one of those. It's really a traffic calming measure.
May I ask a question, please?
Yes.
When I try to speak about the zebra striping, I get mixed feedback from the town over the last 20 years about what is permitted. And I always seem to get directed to, this is controlled by the police department, which I never understood, despite that. When I've gone to Massachusetts, and I speak, I'm an architect, when I speak with other architects there, what you have on your design pattern there in the salmon color, in Massachusetts, that would be signal yellow with a white border. And it's something that I wanted in the town, because we have an elderly population that has visual acuity problems, and I think the graphics that we have on the street are average. They could be a lot better, just so you could get contrast. And I always thought that an intersection that would have that type of signal yellow, really thick band, would be appropriate, but I'm told that it's not permitted. And I don't know who is the person that creates that edict. Is that the state?
Well, there is something that sort of governs nationally the type of striping and signage
Yeah.
that is really allowed. Like all the DOTs across the state follow it. It's called the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. Acronym is MUTCD. So one of the key things in that is you have to have some sort of white stripe, be it a zebra crossing with just striping, or the sort of longitudinal stripes on the outside of a brick or a street print type of pattern like that.
Right.
I don't think the METCD is strict on whether or not brick patterns can or cannot go in. Obviously, you see them everywhere.
Yeah, I know.
But they're allowed as long as there are white stripes on the outside.
Right.
Sort of, just white stripes on the outside. I mean, I don't know all the ins and outs of the town, but I would think the DPW has a say in terms of restriping the town-maintained streets in the town. Obviously, the traffic of the police department comes up because, if I'm not mistaken, the local traffic authority, the LTA in the town,
Mhm.
who is sort of the designated liaison between the state DOT, they're really, that person is in, they're the local traffic authority in town. They know what's what. So they have to approve things as well. So, I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, I mean, it's a matter of,
I can have yellow if I have.
you can have yellow if you have white
Yeah.
stripes on the outside.
Yeah.
The LTA can also, they can have a discussion with the DOT, the state DOT, to ask questions and get feedback on what's allowed as well.
All right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome, thank you.
Can I ask that question?
Yes.
I thought the red crosswalks you were talking about the concrete kind of pattern,
Mm-hmm.
and that would also provide a driver with more kind of tactile awareness of when they move into
It could have that
a
effect.
walk as well, is that correct? Is that one of the reasons why you were recommending this?
Yeah, well, there's not one single reason. I think a lot of towns do it simply because it looks nice. But you could also get that sort of tactile effect, whereas the driver drives over it and it's clear there, like I think in Brantford has actual bricks in the, in the crosswalk. There's also, that could get costly, I don't have the costs off the top of my head, but there's also the option to do what is called a kind of street print kind of pattern, where it's like a thermoplastic kind of like imprint. I think they do it into new pavement. You don't get that you don't get that really like tactile feel if you're a motorist to driving over it. It's just a visual thing. Again, it's a trade-off between costs. But you're right, if you do put in a real brick pattern with real bricks, you can get that effect, which is a helpful thing as well. Again, it
Real
costs.
maintenance issue.
It's a maintenance issue, that's true too. Question?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, that sounds like, especially with snow plowing and everything else, a real maintenance issue.
Mm-hmm.
I've driven all over this country and been through a lot of these intersections, and I'm mostly concerned with the one across from the, library, from the, post office, and the other one down by Chip's Restaurant. Those two
Mm-hmm.
are the most dangerous places for pedestrians. But once you have a light that turns red in both directions, all this other stuff doesn't really matter a whole lot.
Right.
Because the pedestrian is crossing when he knows or she knows that there's red light on both directions.
Right.
As it is now, you have no idea when you cross there, so you gotta be head swiveling and trying to decide when you can jump out into the road and make it across safely.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you hit the button and everything else, and that has almost virtually no effect on the
Yeah.
conduct of the drivers.
I agree.
But that light going red is just, it's just like any red light. You have to slow down, you stop, and you wait until it turns green.
There's a culture, he's correct, there's a culture, in my opinion, in the community, but the pedestrian doesn't have the right of way here.
Right.
That's gotta change.
I agree.
It's gotta change.
That's a problem. At this intersection of Brown Road, that's exactly what you have.
Yeah.
The pedestrian doesn't have a dedicated amount of time to go where there's no
Yeah.
cars turning. He has to contend with traffic turning in
Correct.
and out of the driveway or just cross whenever. The way these signals operate, you can press the button and it doesn't come on, it doesn't call the side street instantaneously either.
Right,
So you can wait, and it's just not clear again because there's no pedestrian signal.
correct.
So to bring all that stuff to best practices and current standards, really, at this intersection and the next one at Brown, they should have real exclusive pedestrian phase walk
Right.
signals.
I agree.
That's probably if I had to say, perhaps the number one recommendation out of this report. Yeah,
I have a question, please.
sure.
I've noticed a huge problem at the ShopRite Plaza the left of them. Sometimes they will stop, period.
Right. Yeah, that's a
So
problem.
if you're a pedestrian and you think you can cross over from ShopRite to Star Shacks on that side or Newtown Savings Bank,
Mhm.
I mean, you've got your life in your hands.
Right.
Because the guy pulling out of the ShopRite plaza doesn't know you exist.
No, I agree. So what we're suggesting is to basically, right now, it depends if the guy is turning right on or right on red. But if he has a green, he could very well have a green light coming out of the shopping center.
Mm-hmm,
And the pedestrian is expected currently to cross
mm-hmm.
when that same driver has the green light. It's problematic. It's not good. It's not safe. And we're suggesting to do away with that and put in new pedestrian signals that would stop all approaches, all traffic.
But that doesn't stop the guy coming on the ShopRite.
Now, doesn't,
That's
well,
the
it
problem.
would give him a red light.
Well, this doesn't matter anymore in Southbury.
Right. Well, that turns into, if there's, I don't know off the top of my head.
Here.
I don't want, yeah,
It used to matter, it doesn't matter anymore.
you know, at some point it becomes an enforcement thing. I don't know off the top of my head if, there's right on red or not. The town could put in no turn on red at those exits,
There's one at.
but whether or not people obey it,
Plaza that everybody totally ignores.
people ignore it, it becomes, really, all you can do is increase traffic enforcement. I don't think the state of Connecticut allows traffic, cameras. Some states allow, red light cameras, which I don't believe the state of Connecticut allows. Those two things are really the only thing you could do in that situation.
Yeah, well, we're not seeing that happen. And there's another no turn on right on the Heritage Village Road, which is totally ignored,
Mhm.
totally. And then, if you don't mind, on the Maggie McFly sidewalk,
Mhm.
employee parking was really thinned down to zero and designated to patrons.
Mhm.
Several years ago, they went and asked the former planning commissioner if, the, employees could start parking across the street, which created this huge safety
Right.
issue. Totally ignored again, and the spots that were set aside for them were now given to patrons,
Mhm. So the employees are parking in the parking lot?
commuters.
That's what we heard, the commuter lot. Right, again, it's problematic because they have to cross the street.
Sure.
And that signal, it's a state signal,
Yeah.
state DOT controlled signal, doesn't have any pedestrian walk signals at all.
Yeah,
Again,
but
you're contending with traffic that's moving. It's,
But the point I'm trying to make is they
Mhm.
had a safe parking spot over at the restaurant.
That's nothing that he can really, that's not what this is about really, but.
Well, he's talking about creating a safe sidewalk for the employees of Maggie's. They had safe parking. Their spots were given to more patrons.
right. Again, ideally, yes, the workers of Maggie McFly's, they wouldn't have to cross the street.
Exactly.
I agree. But, to some extent, it was kind of outside the scope of our project. I hate to say those type of things, but, it's possible that, I don't know how that came to be where the employees are, Told to
Because
park
they wanted
across the
more
street.
customers.
there's the Dunkin' Donuts. I don't know if that's owned by the same property owner. On the other side of there's other, I think, other businesses in
Yeah,
there.
the same owner owns the whole complex.
He might own the whole complex, and he basically calls the shots there. You know what I mean? There's nothing I can do about that.
Yeah, I'm
The
with
town
you.
could do a study and say, I don't wanna get off topic, but I suppose the town could do a study and look at the parking utilization or parking demand in the Maggie McFly's lot. If it's only half full, during regular times, it's hard during COVID, cause not everybody is going out to eat like they used to. But I'm just thinking aloud, if the town, or someone was to demonstrate that even at the busiest times, Maggie McFly's parking lot was only, half full or 3/4 full, and there was all this empty parking, you could make an argument to the landowner that, hey, why are you making employees park across the street when even at the busiest times, there's this extra parking in the corner or something like that.
No,
So that's a thought.
presents a huge safety issue. And on the narrowing the lanes, I think one of the beautiful things about our Main Street is that it is wide, so that you're able to escape from a potential accident easily. And you also will be reducing the ability of the ambulances and fire trucks and emergency personnel to easily get those cars in front of you off to the side.
Well, we could follow up to that. we are not suggesting that the entire roadway get narrowed. If the town were to restripe, not saying go out tomorrow and restripe, but say during the regular repaving that occurs over time, after, obviously, if you repave, you have to restripe. If they were to restripe with narrower lanes, we're not saying move the curbs in, we're saying the restriped narrower vehicle lanes would actually create, in doing that, a wider shoulder. So cars could still get around, or ambulances still could get around other cars that are, say, stopped or waiting to turn left. And you'll see in a couple of the slides up, we actually have a suggestion, a couple spots where a median could go in. So in front of the senior center, there's the pavement width, where you could put in a median. That actually would help the crosswalk, because it's not a signalized crosswalk, you have the flashing beacon. But one of the things that could supplement that is putting in what they call like a pedestrian refuge island. Which basically, it basically,
Do you want me to go to that slide, or would that help?
yeah, I suppose, it's like 3 slides up. Well, this is an example here, there's no crosswalk here now, but we're suggesting that we're not suggesting to change the curbs where they are, or the edge of pavement, but you have essentially a painted median out there. You could still, put in it, what's that?
Landscape.
You could landscape it so it would look nice, but it would also double as a pedestrian refuge island, so it would make the crossing a little bit safer, so you would only have to cross one at a time. You could at least stall for like a moment, just to make sure, double sure that the other lane of traffic is slowing down to let you cross. But again, you still have, I think, 11-foot lanes in this situation, and a 5-foot shoulder, 16 feet, is still enough for an ambulance to get around another pickup truck or sedan.
Not if you've got the line of traffic in front of Rochambeau, which easily eats up a huge portion of Main Street,
Line of traffic.
parked.
They're parked on the street?
Oh, yeah, they're
Okay.
a mile down the road.
Well, I don't know, we haven't seen traffic conditions 100% 24/7, but, there might be periods of time, yes, when traffic is sort of backed up to get to the school or whatever. But, in the big picture, if that happens a half an hour, you still have 23.5 hours of the day where you don't want to have all this wide open pavement where people feel that they can just speed. So it's a middle ground, it's a trade-off, and, what you see here would still allow ambulances to get by. Assuming there's no queues or backup of cars to get into an off-site driveway or something like that. But,
I don't know, I'm so uncomfortable with minimizing the ability to pass through this road easily.
Do you want me to go back to the other slide?
yeah, let's go back. Question while you're at it.
Yeah, the brown one.
We've had issues in town of maintaining landscaping on Central Island and roads. It's difficult to do with
Mhm.
safety requirements, DOT. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but we've got similar islands on one of the state roads,
Right.
67, and we can't maintain the landscape.
Mhm.
So in my mind, it might be better to not landscape it and do something else.
That could be an option, that's the type of thing that,
I'm no expert, but I just mentioned that. I think
yeah.
the problem I personally have with that, George, is that, we created the entrances to town at exit 15 to be welcoming. If the state takes them over, it's just gonna be a paved jungle of, it's not gonna be welcoming at all. And, we really should try to maintain these trees and shrubs, and a lot of times, it's because they don't have proper base under them, to maintain, there's enough topsoil. But, again, it's a beautification. You can see how exit 15 has changed when the 48 ash trees died, and the state took them all down. Those are all put in by IBM and Streetscape, but, they're gone. You used to have a beautiful alley of trees when you got off the highway, and it's gone now, and the entrance of the community, in my opinion, it looks pretty poor. It was much better before.
Well, I don't disagree with anything you're saying, Hugh. It's just that the public works people have been asked to get on those islands on Route 67 and do some landscaping, and we just can't cut everything
I
down.
think
Not
it's,
everything, but they did a major overhaul of that.
yeah,
Well, it's taken a long time. My wife's on the tree committee, so
Mhm.
she's been advocating for that, those islands to get, maintained or cleaned up for a long time. And
well,
she's gotten really
it's an
frustrated.
attitude, you know, and again, it's, if, you gotta get people out there that really love this kind of work. It's a really, it's a garden, and it says something about the community when people are coming off the highway. And since, you know, the state has put up the DOT signs, you know, for every, you know, food establishment we have here in the community, you know, we now have a new traffic on the street. And, you know, what do you wanna say about your town?
No, I'm not disagreeing.
No,
with
I
you.
know that,
I'm
I know
saying
that.
It's like impossible to get the.
But I
public
mean,
works
you
done.
know, if you want DOT and town maintenance to do landscape and beautification, you're gonna get paving and concrete.
I think your point, was that they're traffic calming measures, they're
Yeah.
good for safety.
Right. So, I mean, from a pedestrian safety standpoint, yes. Those are also traffic calming measures, putting in medians, but they can double as an aesthetic thing, a beautification thing.
Yeah.
I can't tell the town how to do, maintenance or whatever.
Yep.
But it comes out, yes, if you have plantings in there, they're going to have to be tended to from time to time with maintenance.
Yep.
It's a trade-off. You know, in some areas you can kind of get a pedestrian or a median effect, that's sort of, again, like a stamped concrete, slightly raised type of thing.
Yep.
Towns have them around, up at Stores Center in Yukon, I believe they have that kind of thing. It's sort of an in-between, I guess. It's not planted, but it is sort of a bit of a raised. It's more mountable, so cars can drive over it, which is good and bad, you know.
Yeah.
And again, you know, it's a bit more maintenance as opposed to having nothing or just paint.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, in terms of safety, if I had to recommend, and what our report is saying, yes, put in medians. Those will actually have a safety benefit. So, here we are at Browns Road. Medians have costs as well. You see the lower right-hand corner, a good chunk of that is maybe a quarter of that perhaps could be median cost to construct.
Right.
So, you know, another trade-off, but, you know, a lot of the same things you're seeing here for our recommendations in terms of putting in pedestrian, actual walk signals with exclusive pedestrian phasing, which stops all traffic when the push button get pushed in. We're suggesting that here too. Crosswalks, ADA ramps at the corners. I haven't been out to walk the site recently, but there was some sidewalk that was a bit deteriorating. At least there was a year ago, on the lower sort of right-hand corner. But again, you know, what you're seeing here and is a lot of what you're gonna keep hearing. The median is in there too. So that's at Browns Road. Let's go to the next slide. Village Square, we started looking at this. You know, this came up in the field walk. You know, there's a cinema across the street. I mean, during the pandemic, not many people are going out to the movies, but across the street on the southeasterly side is, I believe, the Senior Living Center at the Hearth. You know, people walking around, if they want to cross the street in this area, it might be a burden to go all the way down to the signal to cross, which is currently not a great situation anyways, because you don't really have a walk signal there. It might make sense to put in a mid-block crossing here, and put in addition to that, a mid-block crossing, a median, which again doubles as not only beautification, but a pedestrian refuge of sorts. And then supplemented again with the rapid flashing beacons, which, you know, they have their pros and cons. They're at the lower end of the cost. There's actually a higher cost kind of pedestrians, not really a signal, but it's called a pedestrian hybrid beacon, which actually has sort of a red light, whereas what you have with the rapid flashing beacon is more just a blinking, you know, just to get the driver's attention. You know, that would be an added level of safety if this were to happen and you were to put in a mid-block crossing. Even if you don't put in a median, you know, I would suggest putting in a rapid flashing beacon, which is another layer of safety. And with a median, you could also put the rapid flashing beacon, which is basically tied to a sign, you could put it in the median, which is totally in the cone of vision of a driver. You know, a little bit better than having it on the side of the road and having it on the median. Again, could take away from some of the beautification or aesthetic feel, but it would definitely be right front and center in front of drivers if you were to put a beacon in the center, which you could do with a raised median. So that's this location.
I'll
Yes.
This median in particular would also address the issue of there's technically no turn-in, there's no left turn into the hot side of the
Mm-hmm.
cinema parking.
That's an excellent point.
That median would address that issue.
Right. No, I agree. That is, I mean, you can clearly see there's a right turn only striping coming out of there. I'm sure people do take a left into there from Main Street South. You could tell there's a little bit of a triangle median on the driveway, which is, it was designed to be a right in, right out only driveway. The theory behind that is if you reduce the number of turns, you're reducing the number of conflict points, which makes it safer. Putting in the median would physically restrict that and stop people from turning left out when they're not supposed to. So that would be an added safety benefit too. Not necessarily for pedestrians, but for just driving motorists too. So it could have that benefit too. Next slide. All right, so you get Pomerod Elementary at Floodbridge Road. The Main Street South is wide enough where you could put in medians, particularly where there are mid-block crossings now. You could put rapid flashing beacon in the middle on this median here. There's some on the sides. Another thing that shows up in this graphic is there's, Main Street has driveways, as many streets, but some of the driveways do have, where the sidewalk comes down to the driveway, it does have a pronounced sort of like pedestrian, it has like a mogul effect of sorts if you have a lot of driveways next to each other. But some towns, not a whole lot, but what some towns are doing these days is they're suggesting that the opportunity arises and say the site were to get redeveloped, or if you're putting in a new driveway, putting in a sidewalk, keep it level so that, again, it's a trade-off. Motorists would have a slight up and over to get into the driveway, or perhaps just an up. Instead of just kind of like going in real quickly, turning in quickly, they would have to go a bit up, ramp up, essentially. It's not severe, but it would be a slight ramp up to get into the driveway, onto the sidewalk. The sidewalk would remain level. That has the effect of slowing traffic and can be a safety benefit. And that is a recommendation here. Floodbridge Road doesn't have a sidewalk. Could add one there. It's a recommendation. Next slide. So this is a street perspective of what it could look like.
Can I just, there are people watching streaming
Okay.
and they're not able to hear you.
Oh.
Your phone is, so if you could, I hate to do that to you, but is it possible you could, or is the other mic on?
I believe they're both on, but yes. If the other one's stronger, I could definitely move that over.
I'm sorry to do that to you.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't know that was happening.
I'll let you see, okay, sorry.
No problem. So this is a street perspective, a sort of rendering of what this could look like if you were to put in a median, which could be a double as a pedestrian refuge island. On the upper right-hand corner is what it is today. So it's sort of a juxtaposition, just sort of visual of what it could look like. Yeah, that's just a visual of what it could look like. I mean, when we do our reports, we try to, not only have top-down sort of plan view images or graphics of what these things could look like, but just try to supplement it sometimes with kind of street-level perspective, just to kind of get a feel for what these types of improvements could look like. Again, the median, perhaps putting a rectangular rapid flashing beacon on the median to sort of supplement that crossing, which actually had 2, I think, pedestrian crashes. Not saying 100% that this would have eliminated crashes, but this could help just make things safer in general. Yes.
So the left turn lanes are sacrificed for me.
That's a good point. So the left turn lanes would be sacrificed here. Again, a lot of the things with traffic, transportation, it's trade-offs. So trade-offs between safety and traffic flow. So yeah, someone turning left to go on Floodbridge Road, they wouldn't have their own dedicated left turn lane under this scenario. It's a trade-off. Yes? Mm-hmm. The beacons themselves, the light. Mm-hmm. Right, I remember. Mhm.
But one of the, I think what somebody said was, a pedestrian, cars don't really have to stop until you put your foot out into the walkway. So
Mhm.
to me, it's kind of confusing. As a pedestrian, because it's
Right.
flashing yellow, which means caution. So,
Mhm.
I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it's still confusing even if you have those flashing yellow lights like a policeman.
Right.
Who's gonna stop first? Do I put my foot out and hope they stop? Because it looks like a caution light.
It's
It's not really telling them to stop.
it's not a red light. So it's a beacon, and getting back to the MUTCD, beacons are different than a traffic light. You know, the town perhaps could arguably put in a traffic light here, but it would be much more expensive than putting in a rapid flashing beacon. But rapid flashing beacon is sort of the lowest end of the cost spectrum. There's also the in-between, which I don't have a visual of, but it's called the Hawk signal, or it's an acronym for, I think, high intensity activated walk, which is actually more costly than a rapid flashing beacon. But yes, it's designed to get the attention of a driver. Most rational drivers will, if they notice that, they'll at least slow down and say, you know, what's going on? Someone obviously is trying to cross here. Maybe I should slow down. That's what it's designed to do. But yes, they're not going to get a red light or a ticket, I don't believe, if they go through a crosswalk when someone has pressed the beacon. Now, if a pedestrian is on the side of the street, and you're right, if they have one of their, if they're right at the ends of the street in the crosswalk, then I'd have to double up on my state law. But I think they could get a ticket in that case if a pedestrian is actually on the crosswalk. So I hope I answered your question. But yeah, right. The cost is definitely enters into it, but it's better than nothing, And then this is
And I noticed there's another sign put up too.
I believe yes, some crossing ahead type of signs, right? Which is good. Okay, next slide. So Emily, do you want to talk about this slide?
So for Peter Road, we suggested, along with the crosswalks and the ADA curb ramps and all the stuff that Neil has talked about for the other intersections, we proposed to tighten the curb radius near the police station to provide more space to flatten out that area. Right now it's pretty tall, so it's hard for cars to see. And then also to place the pedestrian right at that corner to make them more visible to vehicles. We propose this meandering instead of a straight path to help with the grading, which also presents an opportunity to create some sort of memorial park or something like that. Of course, it's not necessary, but it's just shown there as an example. And that's pretty much it for additional stuff on this side. Really just to put the pedestrian in the view of the vehicles at the intersection.
Yeah, the only thing I might add is right. No, this works. Right now the stop bar coming off of, I believe it's Peter Road. It's far back, so if someone is trying to take a right on red, they can't see. They have to creep up past the crosswalk, which is problematic because you have, at times school kids using the crosswalk, and there's actually cars that are trying to take a right or waiting to take a right that have inched up because they wanted to see left, but the stop bar is back so far. So it's just not a great situation. So we thought this would help because you could actually put the crosswalk really at the intersection and move the stop bars up, so that, if someone is taking a right, they can stop at the stop bar. The crosswalk will still be in front of them, but the motorist stopped there could see left and see what's going on. Visibility with traffic is one of the key things. So we think that achieves that. And the the sidewalk at the corner there is it's quite steep now. So as Emily mentioned, in order to fix that, you kind of have to make up grade and sort of either lengthen and regrade or sort of meander the sidewalk down. So that's what we're suggesting there. to lessen the steepness of that sidewalk on that corner. Yep.
Maybe said it, I just missed it, but the radius of that corner, if you're making a right from Main Street onto Peter,
Mm-hmm.
large vehicles, tractor trailers in particular, are clipping the corner constantly, chipping away
Right.
at that, and it's just too hard of a turn for them. Is that addressed in this, or?
I believe we looked at that. I don't know if we looked at for tractor trailers like a box truck. I believe can still make that turn. It's
The way that represents right now, their tires would go right over
Mhm.
the sidewalk.
there's that to contend with. So if that's the ultimate, if that's a consideration, no doubt. I live in a part of New Haven that's sort of suburban, but there's still got pretty narrow streets. Just to give an example, the school buses, they can't make some of the turns, so they have to actually wait till traffic clears to make a right turn sometimes. Otherwise, yes, they'd go over the crosswalk or the sidewalk in that case. If the town was to be able to, I guess, live with the fact that every now and then a tractor trailer would have to turn wide to not clip the corner, that would be something to consider. It's a trade-off again. If you tighten up a corner, you tend to have, the regular motorist taking the corner at a slightly slower speed too, and again, that could be a safety benefit for, say, 95% of all traffic. But then you have that 5% or less, or 5 to 10% that could be truck traffic. So again, it's a trade-off. I think we would still stick with the suggestion, considering that, and just the town again would have to essentially be okay with the tractor trailer every now and then having to basically swing wide.
That's a real issue for that particular intersection.
Mm-hmm.
The visibility for pedestrians is horrible on that far side where the police station is, but that's a major access for, we have a fuel station going in, there, so all of the
Mm.
town trucks are going, and the police station is there, so.
Right.
There's a lot more vehicles that have to turn on that road from Main Street.
Yeah, the rendering doesn't really do it too much justice. You want to go back to the other slide? Again, if this were to actually get moved to the next level, we, or whoever were to actually fully design this, would take a harder look at that. You could have a situation, or you could redesign the intersection perhaps, so that you only have, I'm thinking out loud now, one turn lane on the northbound approach. So if you could picture that left turn lane getting just removed completely, which would open up the acceptance lane for a car turning right, that could be a possibility. Again, it has traffic flow implications. And the corner itself, the radius on the lower left-hand corner, the southerly radius, it's possible that you could keep that radius and still achieve the sidewalk, the change to the sidewalk too. So you might be able to achieve everything. Again, this is a concept, so what you see here is not necessarily what is going to be 100% implemented someday. A number of different things that could get looked at to perhaps,
If you were gonna eliminate the lane, eliminate the right turn.
It's right. No, you could get rid of the right turn lane. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think we had early on some suggestions for bike lanes, I think, on the street. And this location, you could not fit a bike lane on both sides because the shoulders are not wide enough. You could not fit a bike lane and still keep all the turn lanes. You could, though, even if you didn't put in a dedicated bike lane, you could get rid of the right turn lanes. You still have a left turn on Main Street South. You still have a left turn lane and basically a shared through right turn lane, which would then sort of push out a tractor trailer so he's making a turn from further out, which would help allow him to make that radius. So that's an option too. So you have a few different things that could get looked at So it's good. I'm sort of just thinking out loud again and discussing things as we go along, but that's certainly a possibility. A few of those things. Okay, let's go to the next. Let's go to the next. Okay. So at, again, this is up at Depot Hill Road. Not a whole lot of drastic suggestions here. The signal here does, for example, this location, it does have a pedestrian walk signal, but it does not have a sort of countdown component to that signal. So it just has the red, like, sort of stopper. Maybe it's blinking, if I'm not mistaken. The current standard now would be to have a sort of countdown. So it kind of gives the pedestrian, well, it gives them a clear idea of how much time they have left to finish crossing the street. So that is a suggestion to basically upgrade the signal to incorporate that. And not a whole lot other that's new here. There is a good number of curb cuts. But again, there's an opportunity to perhaps consolidate some curb cuts, what they call access management. It's difficult working with property owners sometimes, but some of these things could come to the forefront if a site were to get redeveloped, in the future. Again, consolidating driveways and curb cuts, it has the effect of, minimizing just the number of conflict points that a pedestrian would have to contend with when walking down the street and the sidewalk. So, next slide. So at Poverty Road, not a whole lot new here either. One thing that we did notice is the side streets. They do, I believe, they both get the green at the same time. Not necessarily a dedicated pedestrian improvement recommendation, but Poverty Road and the other side street you could change the phasing of the intersection so they go slightly, staggered. Because right now you have, for instance, people wanting to turn left from the side streets. If there's glare, I think there was one of the bicyclist crashes might have happened where a bicyclist, which just got maybe clipped or something by someone who's turning left off one of the side streets. I believe even if it was a motorist or pedestrian coming off of Poverty Road, if they get the green and they're going through and someone coming up the other street has the green, they're going to have to, essentially contend with each other. You could rephase the intersection and how it operates to basically put the side streets on what's called split phasing so that they actually run separately. That's a consideration here. Let's see next. What's that?
How does this intersection fare with accidents?
So we didn't take a total deep dive of all of the accidents, but it did have the one bicyclist involved accident. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, next slide. So we're getting towards the Route 6 side. We're suggesting here that perhaps a sidewalk could get added to Garage Road. That's an opportunity. Obviously, front and center is the potential where you have a big painted median now to put in an actual physical median, which could have that sort of effect of actually physically restricting so people could not turn left out of there. If someone's turning left out of Old Tree Road, it's pretty difficult. They have to cross a number of lanes. I ideally don't want that, especially considering that they could take the signal at the other end of Old Tree Road. So physically prohibiting that is an option. That would actually be the only movement that would be, I believe, restricted here, because you could still turn right out, you could still turn left and right into this section of Old Tree Road. So that's another suggestion. And this is at the end of the corridor. It could have the effect of also, if you put in the median, sort of having sort of gateway treatment effect, beautification type of thing. And again, at the signal, it's a huge intersection. It doesn't have dedicated walk pedestrian signals at all. And really, you should work with the state to really try to get a real pedestrian walk signal in there. Because people do cross there. I mean, when we were on the field walk, people were walking, across the street. It's just, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lanes of traffic, plus a little bit of a median. So it's a lot of pavement that someone has to cross while contending with traffic turning off of Main Street South or the shopping center if they're walking across.
Yeah, if you're coming from Woodbury and you get onto Main Street South, I remember the first one to do it to get to my office, but I take the left on the Oak Tree Road, and I'm crossing 4 lanes of traffic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's a lot. And even if you're a motorist, it's a big intersection. I mean, it handles a lot of traffic, so we're not suggesting taking lanes away, but, you know, from a pedestrian safety standpoint, it really should have a dedicated exclusive pedestrian phase component, which stops all traffic if someone pushes the button, and actually should have walk signals there with countdown walk signals. And the final concept slide is the next one, which shows here, you know, really there should be a sidewalk going to the library. We heard that on the field walk and from the public input. It's really a good thing that should get put in there. You know, a lot of schools, people walking perhaps from school, or just anybody who wants to walk to the library. They really should have a sidewalk to get there. So that's a suggestion here on Poverty Road. And a couple more slides. Oh yes, so I think I alluded to it earlier. We didn't pull these sort of recommendations off the top of our head or anything like that. There is statistical data that is sort of published by the Federal Highway Administration. FHWA is sort of a component of the U.S. Department of Transportation. They have a lot of data out there. I mean, just adding a sidewalk where there is none today can have a significant benefit in terms of reducing the potential for pedestrian crashes. So that, you know, again, another thing that I would put at the top of the list as something the town should look at doing. The signals, install pedestrian countdown signal heads where there are none today, install exclusive pedestrian phasing. Those can go a good ways towards improving safety and reducing the potential for crashes involving pedestrians. Pedestrian medians can have a big benefit. So it's just kind of just a list of some of the data that kind of backs up some of the recommendations in the report. Let's head to the next slide. All right, so next steps. This is really where the sort of study ends. We have a bunch of recommendations. And really it's going to come down to really the town having a discussion on what types of things perhaps should get implemented sooner than later. Cost is obviously always a factor, a consideration. In our report, we've sort of prioritized what we think should be done sooner than later based on the potential safety benefits that we saw on the last slide. That said, you know, when I mentioned earlier, every town has a repaving program. If you repave a street, obviously you have to restripe it. There's potential for some low-hanging fruit there. So, for example, next time a portion of Main Street South gets repaved, I have no idea when that would be, but you could restripe 11-foot lanes, slightly wider shoulders. That's a sort of low-cost, low-hanging fruit type of thing that could get put in. Some of the larger cost improvements, you know, looking at how they could get funded. There's potential for grants out there from the state, even from the federal government, to help pay for those types of things. And, you know, every now and then there's new development going in, and you could tie new development to sort of off-site mitigation measures and whatnot that perhaps a developer could help pay for as well. And on top of that, you know, our study looked at primarily trying to improve pedestrian safety, but you know, there's a possibility to improve safety for bicyclists. You know, bike lanes probably don't make a whole lot of sense on Main Street. You know, you're sort of more, you know, regular bicyclist who's a sort of, I guess, you know, hardcore bicyclist is going to bike on the street regardless. But there's a possibility. I mean, you have a lot of right-of-way. You could put in what is called basically a wider sidewalk. You could widen the sidewalk to, say, from 5 feet or 4 feet, 5 feet now to, say, 10 to 12 feet, which could double as a shared use path kind of thing. You see a lot of rails to trails doing that. Obviously, it's not a sidewalk, but they have that 12 feet, which allows for people just walking around and bicyclists to be able to use that facility and not have to be in the street. So that's a thing we think the town should look at, perhaps as a possibility for further study in the future. So with that, I think that's the last slide. I'd be happy to take any more questions. Yes?
This doesn't really pertain to, it's very impressive what you have up there,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the town has forgotten one street that is really a main street for where a bunch of senior citizens are, including myself. I spent 35 years helping people
I now live there on New Wheeler Road. I've been to the police department. I have called the selectman's office, and they're supposed to be returning my call, but I never get it returned. That is a speedway. There are no sidewalks. There is nothing. There's speed bumps. Now, if you stand there, like I have to now use a cane because my balance is off, okay? To walk on that street is like a death, you know, you might as well figure you're gonna get, and are we gonna wait until somebody's killed on that street? And the police, no one can take the time. I mean, if the police wanna make some money, they can sit there and hand out tickets all afternoon for the people that speed up and down that road. Now, if I had known that before I purchased my condo a year ago, I would have never purchased it on that road. It's the most dangerous road in Heritage Village. Heritage Village's roads are very narrow. That is a town road. There are, and you're talking about sidewalks, and you're talking about all this glorious beautification, but you also have over 2,000 senior citizens in Heritage Village that go up and down that road. You also have people that are trying to walk on that road, and like I said, you have to, you know, hold on, you can't do it, because your reflexes, you have to jump to the side if a car comes after you, which has happened to me. And, you know, I'm walking with a dog with a cane, and you're trying to get over to the side of the road. There are no sidewalks. So I think, as a taxpayer, and I am paying the most taxes, because I do not qualify to get my taxes reduced because I'm a senior, I think this is very impressive. But I think the town should take the time to look at that road and see the dangers that you have for your seniors of Southbury. This is very impressive with the beautification, all your new roads and yada yada bing boom. But you're forgetting the seniors of Southbury, who also pay taxes to this town.
No,
Your planning commission, some planning commissioners here, the first selectman, so they heard you, but this wasn't part of the scope of this.
No, it wasn't, but they, the person told me on the phone to come here tonight to room 205 because there are people that are, you know, that are looking at things for Southbury, okay? And maybe I'm out of, you know, out of order, but I really, really think that it's time to look. Now, they've done absolutely nothing. The town, people have complained for years about that road, and they have done nothing. But yet you want to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to beautify Southbury.
no, I hear you loud and clear. I mean, this is a perfect venue for talking about this, and obviously it's relevant.
Property Road is not far from this main
And, you know, I'd like to just get back to, you know, the fact that, yeah, sidewalks, putting in sidewalks where there are none, particularly where there's people walking around who might be walking on the grass or in the street. That's one of the, you know, key things that should get done. Certainly don't disagree. Sidewalks should get put in. I agree.
Yeah, I know I'm not of order because this is a different meeting, but, you know, you're looking at all these beautiful things in these sidewalks that you want to do. The town needs to go look at that area where you have tons of people walking around that are old with canes or a walker or trying to, you know, get across the road, and they do not slow down.
No, I agree. I mean, it should be something the town should look at. And, you know, the full traffic speeding issue is a related component of that. So I agree. Yes?
How many interruptions in the traffic flow between, on Main Street, between 67 and 72 are there? How many traffic lights and things?
1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, there's 6 in between the two state highways. I think there's 6 or 7 signals. And there's the 2 mid-block crosswalks. The only thing we would be adding to that is the additional, the only thing we're suggesting in addition to that is the additional pedestrian mid-block crossing by Village Square.
How many mid-block crossings are we adding to the 6 that are things that are already there now?
There's 6 signals plus the 2 mid-block crossings, so you'd be adding one more.
There's only one thing that would cause traffic to slow down.
One additional thing.
One additional thing.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe so. Yeah.
Correct?
Mm-hmm.
But you're also taking some lanes away here. That's a very busy road.
No, I hear you. I mean, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. If you put in an exclusive pedestrian phase, you will in fact be interrupting traffic flow when someone pushes the button. Because right now, the side street goes when the pedestrian is expected to cross when the side street has the green. Put in an exclusive pedestrian phase, you will be stopping traffic.
You said
That's-
you're putting in one thing, though.
We're putting in one new physical, well, I guess, depends on how you look at it. We're putting in one new crosswalk.
Stop places, are you adding to this?
Okay, so let's back up. You're
Six.
putting in one new crosswalk and 2 signals. You'd be changing how they operate so they have exclusive pedestrian phases. So 3 potential places where traffic could get stopped. Again, it comes down to juggling traffic flow and safety. So, but 3 potential new places where motorists would have to stop.
One last thought.
Yes.
It's really special to drive down South Main Street and not hit a light. That's a wonderful feeling, you hit any lights,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes X time, I don't know what that time is.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be curious to know what it is. Maybe the planning commission ought to know. If, on the other spectrum, you hit all 6 interruptions today, how long does it take? And when we hit all 9, after we put the 3 additional signals in, how long is it gonna take?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you never get, you very rarely get, you're not gonna hit all 9.
All the greens, right.
Very rarely hit none. Middle, you guys have to figure that out. What's the median time to get down Main Street? You can't answer that
Right.
today, I know. But this
Mhm.
is a very busy street, and you're gonna, I'm afraid you might force a lot of people to do what I do, and take the side street down the back.
Mm-hmm. No, that could happen.
And that's not
You know,
even.
and when I talk about 3 potential places where traffic might stop, I mean, the likelihood of you hitting a stop at every single one due to a pedestrian is probably pretty small. I mean, you're probably not going to be crossing a new crosswalk perhaps someday at Village Square every time and seeing a pedestrian they're crossing every time you happen to be driving by. So there's that to take into account too. But there's the potential for 3 locations where motorists would have to stop. What would it add to traffic flow in your sort of corridor commute or travel time? That wasn't really part of the study, so I can't tell you, but there would be some added time. No, we looked at pedestrian safety improvements in terms of focusing on that. Traffic flow, believe it or not, is a whole nother kit and caboodle to look at how the signals should perhaps be coordinated better so that you actually can hit more green lights in succession. That could be a whole nother study in and of itself. I know you had a question.
With the dedicated crosswalks, so that when you hit the button, it stops all traffic,
Mm-hmm.
is there a way that those, the example is someone hits the button, stops all traffic, it just turns green, next person comes up, hits the button, stops all traffic. Is there a way that it says, well, yes, we'll stop all traffic, but we're gonna let it flow for a little bit?
Let me think here. I mean,
Generally how they work.
that's generally, yeah, every time you push the button, it's gonna send a signal to the controller and try to service that. You know, you might get 2 pedestrians who happen to show up and they could go on the same light. Each of these signals sort of operates, I think, on what? I don't know off the top of my head, but it's probably a minute cycle length where it services traffic flow on Main Street. If there's traffic on the side street, it'll service that. If you add a pedestrian phase in there and a pedestrian, it activates it. If there's no pedestrian, it'll skip the phase. But if a pedestrian pushes it, it's gonna give probably a good 15 or so seconds to pedestrian. If someone comes up just thereafter and misses the light and presses the button, I think it'll still get serviced on the next cycle of the light.
Well, I think to more answer your question, you can set it so that it won't turn to the ped phase until there's a certain amount of gap in the traffic flow. That's what you're asking, right?
That would be very
Mhm.
important.
Yeah,
And
so-
not that this happens a lot, but you take a day when the middle school has a half day,
Mm-hmm.
and you take 400 kids that empty out of that school.
Right.
And it's a span, I mean, there's a stream of kids. If you get each kid that's gonna hit this button,
Mm-hmm.
they're gonna have traffic backed up to Woodbury.
Well, we didn't model it and look at it how 400 kids would affect it.
I
But-
understand that, I just, if there was a way
think there is a way.
repeated buttons that you could say, okay, listen, Main Street's gonna run for 25 seconds or a
Right.
minute.
Yeah.
or-
You know,
or
Yeah.
Yeah, the way these
We can
things are,
definitely do that.
As
yeah.
long as it can be adjusted, I have no problem.
I believe it can be adjusted.
If it's always demand, like the pedestrian always has a demand feature,
Mm-hmm.
that's gonna be a problem.
And I don't, it's hard to visualize or explain it sometimes, but if a pedestrian gets, say, 15 seconds of green time, it's not gonna add on to that if a next pedestrian comes up. It's not gonna make that 30 and the 45 seconds like of just straight pedestrians.
Well, I understand that.
It's gonna then service the main street and then has to run through the cycle if there's side street traffic. So, yes.
Given that scenario, the far greater risk is having 200 middle schoolers collected at a corner of a busy street with traffic flowing really fast.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So I would rather have traffic backed up and going slowly for the 25 minutes it takes to disperse the
Yeah, that-
kids than to have
Mm-hmm.
That's an odd example,
ability
but
to
even on a
fly
Saturday,
through. I agree, like,
you know, there's a lot of pedestrians out
there
there.
could be a time
Yeah.
where, yes, people are, it's a beautiful day and there are lots of pedestrians. I don't think we've had that much use, but then again, we just have not had the pedestrian crosswalks to be able to see.
We've gotta have something, cause it's
Have
just
had
too
some,
dangerous as it is now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, if you can cycle it for 1 minute, you can cycle it for 3 minutes. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
There that shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, so the way it typically works is if it's pressed, it'll switch once a certain gap in the traffic is reached. And then once the pedestrian phase goes through all of its time, then all the vehicle directions, the phases will have to go before it goes again. So it's not gonna be like,
It doesn't
oh,
shorten the
stop,
phase.
oh, stop, oh, stop. It just adds more time to the end of it. in
Mm-hmm.
theory.
Mm-hmm. Right. And you'd be surprised. Yes, you might have a short period of time where you have 15 minutes where there's a lot of kids getting out of school. Traffic tends to come back to normal. And yeah, it's sort of gets back to normal shortly thereafter. I mean, every situation is a little different, but those types of situations do they flush themselves out, I guess you could say, where traffic is flowing before you know it. Yeah.
And that's where the exclusive ped helps, because all directions can go at the same time too, so.
Mm-hmm. Right. Sure.
I thought I just heard that you indicate that this was not a traffic flow study. That's a little surprising. We're talking millions of dollars here, and I don't know how it came to be a beautification study.
Solely, well, the first priority was pedestrian safety.
Well, you gotta balance pedestrian safety, traffic flow, and then of course there's aesthetics, and you can do that too
Mhm.
at some reasonable cost. That's fine. But at the very beginning, looks like once every 2 years there's an accident, there's an injury. That's what caused this thing.
On average,
2 years.
yeah,
7 things in 13 years.
that sounds about right.
Okay.
I don't have a lot to say. Again, it's trade-offs between traffic flow and safety. A lot of people, I personally wouldn't want someone I know to get injured. One injury is too many, in my opinion. So if we can do anything we can to rectify or improve things, while still allowing traffic to flow, obviously, I think that's something
Part of
any
the-
town should strive for.
Part of the future studies of a lot of these projects, like before you would remove a left turn to add a median, you would do a traffic analysis to understand
That's a
what
good
the
point.
effects would be on the
Well,
traffic.
exactly. What we have here is a lot of concept design, basically conceptual or very preliminary design. These things, if they were to get implemented, they have to go through a whole sort of, engineering process where, yes, we're not going to make, or nobody's going to make changes to a signal without looking at how it would affect traffic flow and trying to balance out, trying to minimize any negative implications to traffic flow if we were to add pedestrian signals where there are none now and things like that. Question? Yes.
When that movie theater complex was being considered and presented to the town, there were a number of people, myself included, that felt that they didn't do a very good study And the traffic flow, the guys that own the businesses, I'm sure, are gonna be peeved. But you know what? This was brought to the attention of the entire town back a number of years ago before they even put that complex in. And they assured everybody, well, no, it's not really gonna impact the flow that much. So that's my take on it.
Well, I don't know I don't know what to say. I didn't look at their traffic study. And I don't know how well or well not they did a traffic study. Big projects like that should have a pretty robust traffic study that would look at, really trying to improve traffic and minimizing as many traffic flow impacts as possible. I mean, you're right.
They shouldn't downplay the significance of your study
Mm-hmm.
because of traffic flow, because the traffic flow issue was a pending issue a long time ago. And there was a lot of people that wanted to just sweep that under the rug. I'm all for supporting your study.
Okay. Thank you. See, couple questions. How about you first? Yes.
This is very interesting. I agree that I think most communities today want to be walkable communities. It's just very, very desirable. And so we should look at, what we can do to make Southbury more walkable. And so a lot of great suggestions. I also live on Poverty Road, and I want to support the extension of the sidewalk from the library to Main Street, from Main Street to the library, because I see many people, joggers, teenagers, families that walk down Poverty Road, and I always wonder, how did they get by that one section
Mm-hmm.
that they're, nowhere? And I also drive down that, and if I do see a pedestrian in that section with no sidewalk, it's a little nerve-wracking. It is a popular place to walk down Poverty Road. You can walk all the way to 67, and it's well utilized. So I hope that we will add that one section to get us to Main Street.
Thank you. Thank you. Question?
Not a question, but I agree with her. The reason I went on this walk last year was because I do like to walk Main Street.
Mm-hmm.
I like to park at one end, I like to go shopping up Main Street, and get exercise at the same time. So I appreciate making the pedestrians safer, because that was one of my concerns. Every time I got to an intersection, it was stressful.
Mm-hmm.
So, all these great ideas, I appreciate, because I will park on one end of Main Street and do my shopping, and go on the other side of the street and do my shopping on the other side of the street. If I could get across, the 67 or 6 to the shopping
Mm-hmm.
safer, that would be great. Then I go up into Old Navy and I go up there too.
Right.
So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Question? Sorry.
I have one question.
Okay.
I know that it's not pertaining to, this, but I'd like to know what I have to do to get Southbury to look at New Wheeler Road. Because I've tried all angles, and I was told to come to this meeting, so I'd like to know what I can do to get Southbury to take a look at the drag racing road. As a taxpayer.
I think you have to look to your elected officials.
You're gonna spend millions on this, but they can't take the time for their seniors to take the time to go up that road, and you can take all this time to watch all these roads, where you've got over 2,000 seniors, you can't take that time? I'm not impressed with the town.
So this was a traffic study specifically about Main Street and making it more user-friendly for people to walk and et cetera. There's a lot of seniors and people in Southbury that do walk on Main Street. It's heavily trafficked, and for the amount of people it services at this point, for the dollars spending, that's probably one of the reasons why we're looking at that. We have a chance to get a steep grant. I'm not sure if it's a steep grant. It's the name of the grant.
Connectivity grant?
Yeah, so we're going out for a grant. We've applied for it. One is to get people low-hanging fruit, to get people across Main Street much easier, especially up by the green where so many people are using for exercise and health. The other thing we're looking at is that connecting that sidewalk would go from Main Street down Poverty Road, and if you know that there's a bridge that has a walkway across the bridge, the one-way bridge, and then there's another connection of a walkway that goes to the right, and that leads to down to Heritage Village, which brings you over to where you can to the deli and all that. The sidewalk's not there, but that's connecting what we have. I will have you. I was staggered at the cost estimates of building a sidewalk. It's very expensive and a lot more expensive to do than you think. And this short piece, there was an estimate on doing the short piece in Poverty Road. I forget the number, but it's quite expensive. So we can't talk about New Wheeler Road and see what.
You can put speed bumps in, it's not gonna cost that much to put speed bumps.
Yeah, well, speed bumps, DOT is not happy with the state, so that it's not as easy as
Well,
put.
they make them now that they remove them.
Yeah. So that is why we and it really, no disrespect to Mylone and McBroom, but I think without engineering, we knew that our crosswalks on Main Street were a problem, especially up by the green. And we also knew that not connecting, it's been talked about time and time again with planning for many years about the lack of connection on that short piece between the sidewalk there on Poverty Road. So that's kind of why we looked at these things as low-hanging fruit that could be connected and make a full connection even into Heritage Village. It may not be the connection on New Wheeler, but at least there's already some infrastructure there we can take advantage of.
We're paying millions, but, I really think you should, that's your main, Southbridge's main road into the village. There are plenty of solutions. You're worried about everybody else in crosswalks.
Question?
I can guarantee you if I get hit up there, I will be suing the town. That I can guarantee you. I won't say anything more, but.
Did you have a question, ma'am?
And if I do get hit, I will be sued.
So,
Thank you for your time.
safety being the big topic, which
And
will,
sorry to get in your program and interrupt your program,
It's okay, no problem.
but I was told to come.
Okay.
okay, so, we're all on the same page so far as safety measures go.
Mm-hmm.
But this week alone, I cannot tell you how many people crossed Main Street, the length of Main Street at various points, without having used the existing crosswalks. And later in the evening, kids out on skateboards crossing the street in the dark. That scared me, because I almost hit them. I did not see them. They were wearing dark clothing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking up, now this is gonna, I'm getting to the point of the discussion for behaviors. When you can go to Germany, you cannot cross the street unless you're in a crosswalk. You just don't do it. And there are other countries like that. Behavior control has a lot to do with what's happening here. You can put in 10,000 crosswalks, I don't care, if you have one every 15 inches. If you're closer to a point of crossing than you are to a crosswalk, you're gonna cross where you are. I think a campaign, if we're gonna go onward with this idea, we need to start a campaign to get people to change their behaviors. If otherwise we can spend $50 million.
I think there's some good suggestions. I mean, thinking out loud, perhaps there's an education campaign that could get, started by the town. Just a safer crossing, use the crosswalk, don't just cross wherever.
Citing them.
And then there's the enforcement aspect of it. Yep.
for
Mhm.
illegal crossing. But we've gotta get to the point where we put some responsibility on the individual
Mhm.
instead of the cost on many individuals.
No, I hear you. There's definitely certain things, education-wise, enforcement-wise, that are not necessarily part of an infrastructure engineering study, but that could get looked at.
I think
Behavioral-wise, yeah.
and
I'm not gonna say it's okay for kids to be kids, but, you know, some kids just,
right, of course,
you know, you can't get through to them, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I'm.
but, you know, education, I think, is something that could help. Mhm. And enforcement where necessary, perhaps.
Got a money job, you can write a ticket. You pay
Yeah,
attention.
you know, if there's consequences, people do things less. Do things you don't want them to do less. Okay. I'd be happy to take any more questions, but if not, that's fine too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.